welcome, and this is going to be recorded, and it'll prompt you on your screen to just continue if you're okay with that recording. Just to let you know that it will just be shared internally only with members of the community, so accessible for parents as well as faculty, but it won't go beyond that. And that's just so that we can share this presentation with parents that weren't able to access either the one that we did this morning at 7 a.m. or this one, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I think for many of you, it's good afternoon, and for some of you, it might be good evening. My name is Kirsten Johnston, and I'm the Director of University Guidance here at Lakefield. And I'm here with Jen Fricke, who is our Director of Student Success and the Program Area Leader for Guidance and Learning. And Jen's going to be here helping to moderate the presentation with any questions that you might have along the way. So welcome, and I'm just really happy to have you be here. For me, I guess it feels like I'm going to be giving you a lot of information right up front. I plan to sort of talk for maybe about 30 minutes, and then I'll pause to have any questions maybe answered. You can pose questions. So as I go, as we are going through this material, if there's a question that comes up, feel free to just pop it into the chat box, and Jen will be able to sort of moderate and look at the chat box. And when we pause in about 25-30 minutes time, then we can see there probably will be similar questions that many of you will have. And then I'll continue almost to the latter third of the presentation and hopefully have time again at the end to answer any questions. So lots of information. Hopefully it will be helpful to you wherever your son or daughter is at in this process. So whether they're in grade 9 or grade 12 or somewhere in between, I'm hoping that this information, particularly starting first with trends that we're seeing with current grads and recent grads, will help provide a bit of a framework and an understanding of what students are, expected of, what's expected of them, what some of the newer changes are, impacts of things. I'll spend some time talking a little bit about COVID as much as we know it and the impact of the pandemic, both on recent grads and current students applying. I'll also give an overview of the guidance process. So if you are a current parent of a grade 12 student, you hopefully are a little bit more well aware of where the grade 12s are at in this process and what they are doing. But for those of you that have a son or daughter that's in grade 9, 10, or 11, it'll give you a sense of what to expect as we move forward. And then at the end, I'll just, sort of summarize with some things, some tips, and hopefully some resources for you as parents to be able to have. Okay, so let's get started. And again, just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of where we're coming from. So last year's grads and some of the trends that we're seeing, we typically have on average anywhere from 100 to 112 grade 12 students each year. So that number is fairly consistent. And what I would say is also fairly consistent is about 2/3 of them actually head off to university in Ontario. And so that would include domestic students as well as international students. That Ontario university destinations continue to be a real draw to many of our students. This past grad class, we have 19 students actually at Queen's. So Queen's, Western, and U of T continue to be really popular, but every year we have students going off to those 3 schools: Western, Laurier, Guelph, McMaster, and so on and so forth. And part of what alters where a student goes has to do with the program that they're interested in applying to. Many for, say, engineering will go to Waterloo or U of T, and then for some other specialized programs, they might be looking at McMaster or Queen's or elsewhere. You'll see about the same percentage, about 15%, go off across Canada. And so last year we had students literally go from coast to coast. We have 3 students currently studying at UBC. We have 4 students out on the East Coast studying at Dal or King's College. And we have 6 current 2020 grads studying at McGill University in Montreal. And that same percentage, I would say, also tends to go abroad. So we have over 40 different countries represented by our student population. We see that also represented in their university destinations. So right now we have graduates studying in Scotland at the University of St. Andrews. We have grads from last year studying at the University of Texas in Austin. We have a student who's studying at EHL, École Hôtelière in Lausanne, Switzerland. And we also have a student at the University of Queensland in Australia. Every year, we have students take a gap year. They decide to take a break from high school to before pursuing university. And I'll talk more about the gap year process and how we support students in that in a little bit. But you know, something that is interesting, last year's grads, despite the pandemic, a time when we thought we might see an increase in our grads requesting to defer and take a gap year, we actually saw probably one of the smallest percentages, about 7% opted this past year to take a gap year. And that is down from the year before when we had 17% opt to take a gap year. So it does fluctuate slightly from year to year, and depending upon what's going on, both in the world and I would say in their lives. One of the things that parents are often interested to know about is what are they studying when they go off to university. And what I would also say is pretty consistent amongst our grads is the split between or among students who pursue social science degrees and those who pursue science and the business commerce management. Those three areas tend to have our largest percentage of students heading off, with most going to do a Bachelor of Arts degree with some type of specialization related to it. And then an almost equal split between those pursuing science and those pursuing business. And what we are seeing from year to year, I would say over the past 5 years, is a steady increase in students interested in applying to engineering and also computer science programs. And we're also seeing, I'm happy to say, an increase in female students interested in those professions as well. And what tends to happen, it's a little bit like supply and demand. As a program gets more popular and more competitive, it often tends to get a little bit more competitive in terms of the admissions. So computer science and engineering are starting to ramp up, I would say, in terms of getting more and more competitive. Last year's grads also really looked to do some specialized programs. So we had a real interest in students wanting to do design. We have graduates that are studying industrial design and graduates who are studying game design, so video game design, as well as architecture. And then we have a couple of graduates who are doing musical theater. So one who's off to Sheridan for a Bachelor of Musical Theater Performance, and also one at the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto studying vocal music. So a wide range of areas of interest among all our students. When it comes to applying, I would say marks still remain a major factor in the admissions process. Universities, regardless of where they are in the world, are looking at how our students are doing in their academics. That is important. And we talk about, in the world of guidance and university admissions, a top 6 university admissions average. And what that means is that when students apply to university, they are applying to a specific program and they need to use certain courses in that top 6 grade 12 admission average in order to gain entrance. And the prerequisites that are required really vary from program to program. So a student, let's say, if I come back to engineering, the prerequisites that have to be included in that top 6 are very specific. They have to use English, they have to use advanced functions in calculus, chemistry and physics, and that only lets them use one other grade 12 course to throw into that mix of the top 6. And then if you contrast that with, humanities or social sciences, it's English needs to be used, and then students can put in their next best 5 grade 12 courses into that mix. So it does fluctuate amongst programs, and guidance counselors will be happy to sort of go over that with parents individually, and definitely we do that with students as well. Schools in the East Coast look at the top 5 admission average, so that gives our students a bit of flexibility that way. But I would say that most of our students, by the time they get to grade 12, they already have 1 or 2 grade 12 credits under their belt, so that if they're taking 6 courses in grade 12, they have some flexibility and leeway in terms of that top 6 admission average. And although marks are important, I would also say that more and more schools are looking beyond marks. And what is a student doing outside of academics? What kinds of co-curriculars are they involved in? What types of leadership opportunities have they taken part in? Community service, and also work experience. So more and more schools are looking for that information, because they're interested to see what is a given student going to contribute and do at their school, and how are they going to fit in it and be a part of that community. The way that students are able to showcase and highlight the things they do beyond academics are through what we call supplementary applications. And it takes many different forms depending on what university and what program, but typically it involves a series of essays, written essays, a resume. Sometimes there will be video essays or video interviews. Sometimes there are timed essays or admissions tests as part of the process. But generally speaking, it is a combination of creative sort of portfolio work or written work to showcase these things. In terms of early offers, Canada, we don't really have the same early offer system or the same early admissions process as is available in the US. So in the US, students can identify one school or several schools that they're applying either early decision or early action. And in Canada, it doesn't really work that way. Students can apply early, and by early, I mean, let's say prior to Christmas. But the main sort of submission date and deadline for marks isn't until February. So we always get our students to apply initially to schools in Ontario and across Canada before Christmas. And what universities will see when we do that is they will see the student's transcript. So your son or daughter's transcript, and they'll most be interested in the courses that a student has completed in their grade 11 year. So while they may have access to the grade 9 and 10 curriculum, and although that's very important and it provides foundation for success in grade 11 and 12, they really are looking at what a student completed in their grade 11 year. They're looking at completed grade 11 courses and if they have any completed grade 12 courses. And depending upon the school and depending upon the program, students may expect to see an offer of admission prior to Christmas. So before that main February mark submission deadline, or which is the main time that we submit for. When they receive offers at any point, whether it's before Christmas or in February or March or April or May, all offers are conditional, and they're conditional on a student's final grades. So guidance counselors work really closely to monitor students and their progress in their actual courses, what courses they've completed and what their marks are. We obviously work really closely with them on their supplementary applications, the essays and the video portfolio, and help prepare them for interviews and all of that kind of thing. But we are also really looking to make sure that students understand the conditions of any offers that they receive. And the conditions can vary from school to school. So Western will be really specific, and they'll say, regardless of what program, you need an 84% average on your top 6, and you need to maintain that right through to June. Queens will say, English has to be a minimum of 80%, for example. Then there'll be the other sort of side of things. There'll be somewhere like McGill where they will just say, they'll be a little bit more vague, and they'll say to students, please maintain your current level of standing at the time of the offer. So we really then encourage students, to try and keep their overall average between 3 and 5% of what it was when they received the offer. So there are, early offers, but there is definitely some flexibility within that. This year, I would say that some schools, and I'll talk a little bit about COVID in a minute, but some schools are maintaining the February mark submission deadline and looking and waiting for marks in February and won't give early offers. And then other schools will give earlier offers. So as competitive as the university application process can seem to students and parents, what I like to remind students is that universities are also competing for them and for the best students. And this is definitely somewhere where our students really shine, again, because they've got the academic strength and academic rigor, and they're doing, really well academically. And then they also have all of the co-curricular involvements in leadership and community service initiatives. So with scholarships, many of our students automatically receive scholarships and funding just based on merit alone, and so no separate application is required. The graduating class of last year received almost 1.2 million collectively as a class in scholarship funding. So we ask students to not only give us copies of their offers of admission, but we ask them to give us copies of any and every scholarship award that they are given, so that we can keep track of that data. And also so that we can help them. I mean, part of the decision in the end of May for students, it's not just the university and the program of choice, but for some, they will actually, take the scholarship funding into account. There are other major entrance scholarships that students can apply for. But before I speak to those, the other thing that students can consider, certain universities, Queen's and UBC, for example, will say that as long as you apply by December 1st, you'll automatically be considered for major entrance scholarship award money without any additional. And then there are, of course, these additional ones that can be applied across a variety of schools in Canada. So things like the Lawrence Scholarship or the TD or the Schulich Leaders Scholarship, those are ones that can be awarded to students who are Canadian citizens across Canada with a variety of schools. And then each university often will have their own major entrance scholarships. So Western and the University of Guelph, for example, have presidential scholarships that students can apply for. All of the information about scholarships is posted on EDSB. There are two places to sort of be aware of. One is a university guidance group specifically for students, and all grade 11 and 12 students have access to that university guidance group on EDSB. And I'm sure that grade 9 and 10 students, if they were interested and really keen and wanting to know what some of the opportunities are for university guidance, could access that as well. And then there's also a university guidance for parents EDSB group. So a lot of what we post for the students is mirrored in that one for parents, so that you can also be aware of things like scholarships and other information. There aren't as many scholarships for international students. Many of them, the eligibility requirements have to do with having Canadian citizenship or permanent resident status, but there are a few that are known to have some that are eligible specifically for international students. So U of T has one that we can nominate one student for an international scholarship award called the Pearson. Western also lets us nominate one student specifically as an international student. And last year, UBC, students who met that December 1st deadline, many received scholarships. And one international student from Germany received a scholarship worth $80,000 over 4 years. So there is lots of award money to be had, and that can make a big difference in a student and a family's decision of where they want to go. And in that latter case, it was the tipping point. She was thinking of staying in Germany, and she ended up deciding to do UBC. I want to take just a few minutes to talk about some trends across different sort of geographical regions. So talking a little bit about the US and what we're seeing, a little bit about the UK, and then also other international destinations. So every year we have probably 10 to 12% of our graduating class apply to schools in the US. And most will choose the US because they're looking for what are known as the Ivy League. They're really highly selective, somewhat prestigious schools in the US, the Harvards, the Princetons, the Stanfords, that are called need blind. They do admissions in a need blind process, which means that they take in all of the admission application information for a student. They assess their academics and their holistic, curricular involvements and achievements, recommendation letters and the like, and they make a decision as to whether or not they have a spot for that student regardless of financial ability. So that's the need blind process, and that's specific to Ivy League. Eventually, they do ask for financial information, and that's one of the key differences between the American system and the Canadian system. Ultimately, they want to know what can you afford as a family for their education, just given that, particularly with the private education system in the US, it's very expensive. But with the need blind Ivy League, one of the draws is that they will give an offer, and then they ask you what you can afford, and then they match the difference. So that's one particular draw, but we are seeing more and more students, whether it's because of having American citizenship or because they're interested in really specific and specialized programs, apply to the US for schools other than the Ivy League. So looking sort of beyond, and to still very highly selective schools, but beyond those traditional Ivy League. To give you a sense of the level of competitiveness and the difficulty we have in trying to predict whether or not a student will get an offer, when it comes to the US and those highly selective schools, they are seeing upwards of 40,000 applications for anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 spots. And that's for domestic students. So the acceptance rate is about 5 to 7%. And then for our international students, they have even fewer spots to be able to vie for. So it's really competitive. It's hard to predict. If a student or a family really wants to go to the US and that's their absolute first choice, we really encourage students to have, in addition to what we call the reach choices of the Ivy League, we ask them to have some realistic and some backups just in order to make sure that they do have a spot. available. I've started standardized tests. I'll come back to that a little bit with the impact of COVID. But essentially in the US, whether it's the common application or the coalition application or individual university applications, there's a lot more time and effort required. In addition to the resumes, students have to write anywhere from 1 to 5 or 6 essays per school. So I have currently, right now, I have half a dozen students applying to schools in the US, and they are, you know, if they apply to 10 schools, most don't apply to that many. I would say maybe they apply to 8 schools. You can imagine the number of essays, and these range from 150 to 650 words. And once they get through 1 or 2 schools, they are able to kind of mix and match some of their essay responses and tailor them to the given school, but a lot of time and effort required. Again, the testing, there is a test component, an assessment component, and of course that's being looked differently this year, but in past years and in future years, we expect that that will still be somewhat of a factor. We also often tell our students to think about grad school. They can do really well at an undergraduate school in Canada, really be that sort of big fish in a smaller pond, and then successfully apply to grad school at some of those top schools in the US and internationally. In terms of the UK, we always have students interested in the UK. One of the draws for the UK, I think, is the direct entry program. So things like law and medicine, where you don't have to do an undergraduate before applying to that postgraduate program. So that's always really popular. We also have students applying. This year we have grads. One grad's studying dentistry in Scotland, and another one is studying veterinary medicine in England. And so those are 2 other direct entry programs. The other, you know, sort of popular programs at schools in the UK include international relations and doing something like PPE, which is a politics, philosophy, and economics degree modeled after sort of the initial one that began in and at Oxford and Cambridge. And then every year we have students who are applying to business or management, engineering, and science as well. The process is really so much more straightforward than the US, and a little bit more involved than Canada. So if you kind of have the US on one extreme, Canada on the other, the UK is somewhat in the middle. So students get to apply to up to 5 schools in the UK, and they have to write 1 personal statement, and they also have a letter of recommendation to support their application. The thing that's really different about the UK compared to even Canada or the US is that students really have to know what program they're interested in. They have very specific and specialized programs, and so typically students will complete their degree outside of a professional program in 3 years, sometimes 4 years, and they're really focused. So if they're studying physics, they are studying physics without much room for electives, which is very different from, say, the Canadian or the American system. You know, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in terms of Brexit and how that's going to impact European students. I don't know if it's a trend related to Brexit, but certainly this year I'm seeing fewer students from Europe, particularly Germany, wanting to apply to the UK, and they're looking elsewhere across Europe. We have students successful every year getting into top universities in the UK. So every year we will have students, you know, having entrance into St. Andrews, University of Edinburgh, London School of Economics, University College London, Imperial College London, and I would say every couple of years, Oxford and Cambridge. Whereas with the US Ivy League, it's probably 1 student every 2 to 3 years successfully gaining entrance into an Ivy League. And so, as I mentioned, more and more students are interested in schools further afield. So we have the one student who actually was returning to Australia, and that's why she's studying at the University of Queensland in Australia. But another school that's becoming increasingly popular for our students is IE University in Madrid and Segovia in Spain. And this year, it's interesting just to see the trends and the paths and the influence that peers can have on each other. But I have more students than ever wanting to apply to schools in the Netherlands and in Denmark, and a few in Italy as well. So guidance counselors work with students regardless of where they're applying. We've worked with students on applications, like I said, to Switzerland. We've done to Hong Kong, essentially all over the world. In terms of a gap year, so I mentioned at the beginning that we didn't see as many students taking a gap year as we thought might, given the pandemic, but it's always a popular option for our students. You know, those, I think in some ways, some of them catch the travel bug here, whether it's because they've gone on exchange or they've done round square service projects, or because of the influence of just being living and learning amongst people from over 40 different countries. But many of them are very much interested in taking that year break from high school before going to university. Regardless of whether or not a student is absolutely certain they want to do a gap year, or they're just, on the fence and not sure and they're wanting to kind of suss it out, we always ask students to still apply in their grade 12 year to university. And the reason for that is we can recognize that sometimes things change. So where a student's at in November may change from where they're at in May or June of their final year. So we want to make sure that they have options open to them. But also it just gives a student, your child, something to be able to fall back on should they go off on a gap year and then, return and they know the program in the school that's of interest to them. But there are lots of reasons for a gap year. Pandemic aside, travel is one, volunteering, working, and just giving students a little bit more time to figure out what it is that they want to do and what they want to pursue. But we get them to apply. In the spring of their grade 12 year, they identify one school that they'd like to accept an offer to, and then we work with them to request a deferral. Most universities and most programs will grant a deferral. There are some really competitive programs that will say, sorry, we only have so many spots and you'll have to reapply next year. But most will grant the deferral as long as you're committing to not going off to any other university. So the understanding is, not accepting at UC and I'm accepting at McGill, and I'm going to try things out west, and if I don't like it, I've deferred McGill. You can't, we ask students not to do that you just pick one and that you're committed to not doing any post-secondary studies anywhere else in that time. And many parents, the concern is that they might not want to return to school after a year off. But in my experience, it's very rare to see a student not return. If anything, they return to university or return to school more engaged, more confident, more appreciative of sort of education than they had when they're coming directly from high school. So I'm a big proponent of it. The other thing that Lakefield offers that's unique amongst schools is what's called the British Alumni Traveling Scholarship. So kind of connecting scholarships with gap year, affectionately known as the BATS. It is a scholarship that is funded by the Friends of Lakefield College School, a group of alum in the UK, and they fund 1 to 2 scholarships a year. So we've had 2 students on several occasions get to be on the receiving end of this scholarship. But the funding allows them to take a year and travel. There are 2 stipulations. One is that you begin in England and that you live and work in England for usually 2 to 3 months at the outset. And then you're free after that to kind of go and travel where you would like to. And then the other agreement the student makes is that they agree to write a reflection on their experience, and that gets published in our British Alumni Traveling Scholarship Journal. And we now have, over 3 decades worth of alum who've gone off to do this and really gained so much from the process. Oh, and they do have to do a presentation. In January, they have to meet with alumni and give a little presentation. So before we go to pause for questions, so if you have any questions at this point, definitely feel free to enter them in the chat box. I'm just going to talk really briefly about COVID and the impact. As best we know it, as things have been happening this year, things continue to be changing and be updating, and we're trying to be as flexible and adaptive as possible. But what I can tell you, and most of you probably already know, that universities have primarily gone remote in terms of their delivery for undergraduates, particularly first year university classes are remote. And so we have many of our grads have traveled to the campuses and they're in residence or they're in the city and they're doing their courses remotely that way and trying to meet people and be a part of a community in a physically distant and safe way. And then we have a number of grads who have opted to stay at home but engage in their course material remotely. And regardless of which option students have chosen, what I continue to be impressed with is just our students' resiliency and their ability to be adaptable and flexible, and also their ability to just continue to embrace new opportunities and meet people in much the same way that they've always done while they've been at Lakefield. The other thing that we're seeing in terms of how it's impacting admissions here for students currently applying is a slight change in when we're submitting marks. So in the past, I talked about the February being the main marks submission date. And what's new this year is that we are now submitting marks initially in November. So in the past, they would have always seen a student's completed transcript in November, but they would have never seen any current grade 12 interim marks until February. And this year we're submitting them in November. So that date is coming up. It's November 20th. So there will be a little bit of probably a gap between what the mark is on a student's report card or your son or daughter's report card and what will be submitted on November 20th to universities. But it means that universities will be able to see all of the completed marks in grade 11, including any grade 12 courses, as well as interim marks for up to 2 or 3 courses that they're currently enrolled in. So depending on how many courses they have in this module, they'll see interim marks for those. And then we will submit marks again in February. And in February, they will see completed marks for the Mod 1 courses, and they will see interim marks for the January or Mod 4 courses. I don't think we will try and squeeze in the Mod 5. I think there won't be enough time to get assessment from the Mod 5 February courses, but we submit marks again in April. And then we submit marks again finally in June. So there are these different rounds, and we may see an increase in those early offers coming out for students based on the November marks. You know, if their grades from last year were strong and if they're currently doing quite well, there may be a slight increase. But like I mentioned before, schools like McMaster have said they're not giving any early offers. They're waiting to see what those marks are in February. What universities have told us, guidance counselors, we have been attending different webinars, and we attended what's called a regional dialogue conference, all virtually, where we had the chance to hear from all universities in Ontario. And what they are saying is that, you know, if a student is taking, let's say, calculus, for example, and they're not taking it until February, that will not impact them in a negative way on their applications. So if calculus is something that needed to be included in their top 6, universities will look to what their advanced functions mark is, or they will look to what a grade 11 math mark is in order to get an idea of and project where they might be at. So they've assured us that, you know, they won't be at a disadvantage. If you think of the public school system, and many schools are in quadmesters, there will be many students applying who won't even be able to show marks at all before the April grades. So I think with Lakefield, we'll be in a really fortunate position that by April, universities will be able to see either final or interim marks for all courses that students are taking. The other thing that, you know, has impacted university applications from the pandemic has obviously been with the US and the SAT and ACT testing. The majority of schools have gone test optional. So in the past, where that's been a very important part of the application, or a way to really sort of sift through those thousands of applications, they have gone test optional. And again, they've assured us that it won't have a negative impact. We have some students that were able to write their SAT 1s, but not their subject tests, and vice versa. And we comment about that in the counselor recommendation. We include a note about it in our school profile. But, you know, the majority of schools are really optional, and that's not going to impact our students. Schools in California have actually even banned the admission of SAT and AC tests in the admission process. So I think we might start to see a trend in that more and more schools in the US may play less and less emphasis on the SAT and ACT, but we will see. The other way I would say that it's impacted our current students, both grade 11 and grade 12, who are trying to get more information about what schools are of interest to them, what programs are of interest to them. We haven't been able to take students on a university field trip visit. And so traditionally, every October, we take all of our grade 12s on a visit to at least 1 or 2 universities of their choice, and they have, you know, up to 3 different choices available to them. But of course, that hasn't been possible. Some universities are still offering tours. And so you'll see, I'll encourage you at the end, if possible, to take your son or daughter to visit as many schools as possible, whether they offer formal tours or not. Instead, what's been happening is they've been posting a lot of different virtual tours. And likewise, normally we would host representatives who would give small group information sessions to students about their university and their different programs. Those have all moved virtually as well. They're all posted on NEDSB, both on the one for parents and the one for students. And while it can sometimes be a bit overwhelming, we've definitely had, sometimes a feel of like death by Zoom and webinar in the university application process. Registering for the ones that are of real interest to, a student is really recommended, because even if they can't attend right there in person, like this one, we're recording it, it's something they can access after the fact. Every university on their admission site has all sorts of offerings beyond these kinds of webinars and info sessions. So there are sessions that are being streamed live by students. There are special sessions that are being hosted by different faculty so that students can learn more about subject-specific areas. So there's lots there. It's just a matter of taking some time to do a little bit of research and navigating. And we, we're very fortunate to have Brendan Fell, who is our guidance administrator, and he's continually posting and updating EDSB for those opportunities for students. The only other thing I'll say about COVID, we did have a parent in it, I guess maybe it was in one of my interviews earlier this morning, ask about the double whammy, like will it be more difficult for students next year? So this year's grade 11s when they apply, or even this year's grade 12s when they're applying, in terms of gaining admission, because people might not be going to university as much. And I would just say we haven't seen a real increase. Like I said, if anything, it's been a decrease in the number of students wanting to do a gap year. And universities have also been reassuring us to let us know that while they're not expanding the number of spaces available for the programs at this point in time, they are not seeing a real change in the numbers of applications from this past year and numbers of, I guess, acceptances from this past year. Okay, so I think with that, I'm just going to pause and see if there are any questions that anyone would like me to answer before going forward. We still have a good 20 minutes. I'm just looking up at my clock.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten. So you already answered one question about the marks being different this year, so that was really helpful. One parent had a question about how do university admissions offers handle the way that schools mark differently? So is there grade inflation? How do universities compare the marks from different high schools?
Yeah, I would say, I can actually say quite confidently that universities take a mark is a mark is a mark when it's coming from an Ontario school. So any school that is recognized by the Ontario Ministry of Education, they do not look at the school to see any difference and to give any favoritism. What they are looking at essentially is the mark. And so whether a student is coming from a public school with an average of 85% or private school with an average of 85%, they are taking that mark as it is assessed. And I would say for where our students, again, really shine is all of the extracurricular involvements that they're able to do. And particularly this year when many schools, all they're able to do is offer, in class, 1 or 2 classes at a time. Our students are out there, Friday, it was Friday Night Lights, and students are moving from performing on the field in the jazz ensemble to playing soccer or field hockey, and really able to engage in all of the other program offerings. So those are the ways I would say that definitely set our students apart. But in terms of marks, when it's the Ontario curriculum, that's what they're looking at. I'll talk a little bit about APs in a few minutes, and there's a little bit of variation with APs, but in terms of regular Ontario high school marks, no special consideration.
Okay, great. In respect to a gap year, if a student deferred an acceptance and to take a gap year, would that take away any scholarship offers?
No, usually scholarships are maintained, and that's one of the really nice things, that they're able to hold on to that scholarship for up to 1 year. And like they're only able to hold their spot typically for up to 1 year, but the majority of schools will maintain the scholarship offer as well. It kind of comes hand in hand. Literally, they will get this offer of admission with the scholarship, and yeah.
Okay, great. And then one more question before we move on. In relation to sports and university acceptances, are there any sports scholarships offered in Canada, or are sports used to round out an application to make their application more competitive? And if sports are a deciding factor for a student, how would families find out about the quality of a sports program at a specific university?
It's a really good question. It's very different in Canada compared to the US. So there are not sports scholarships, athletic scholarships, the way they take place in the US, for instance. Students are still encouraged, if they would like to participate in a varsity level sport, we will work with the student and the school to connect them with the coaches, but it's a separate process from admissions altogether. But once a student is at the university in Canada, then there's actually even greater chances and opportunities for scholarship, both sports related, but also I would say more academically and merit-based related. So once a student, and this is especially true for international students, once they're a student at the school, then that opens up a whole new range of scholarship opportunities, but not in the initial from high school into first year consideration.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'll just move on. I would like to spend some time going over, our program and how we support students, and then talk a little bit about ways, that students can prepare, but also, gain enrichment and gain sort of some, taking steps ahead to move forward with the university application process ahead of their grade 12 year. So in terms of preparation, we're actually transitioning from a phase of where we offered careers over 4 years to returning to sort of the old model of having careers take place in a student's grade 10 year. So most students now, I would say the majority of our students have already earned the careers credit, and they've done a little bit of university research and a little bit of self-reflection, a little bit of resume and LinkedIn type preparation, and they're kind of moving forward. But we are also in the midst of creating sort of the road to post-secondary. And so in lieu of the old career system where we did a little bit in grade 9 and 10 and 11 until we got to grade 12, we're now starting to help students choose their courses and tailor them to pathways that they might be interested in pursuing. So that happens throughout the student's high school career. One of the ways that we really are able to engage with students in terms of a university guidance perspective is through course selection. So we do that in January and February of each year for all students. We have guidance counselors that are assigned to students by Alpha in grade 9, 10, and 11, and I'll talk more about that toward the end. And then ideally, whomever we've worked with in grade 9, 10, and 11, we're the same guidance counselor. There are 4 of us, and we're the same guidance counselor for them in grade 12. It doesn't always work perfectly that way. And as many of you, if you're on this call and you had me for your son's guidance counselor in grade 11, but I'm not their guidance counselor this year, it has to do with timetable and scheduling. So once a student gets into grade 12, they're slotted into a guidance class, and they work in a small group with a guidance counselor. And right now this year, we're meeting twice a week in lunch. So it's the second half of our hour-and-a-half lunch period, where we meet twice a week as a group, and we support students in terms of the research process and building or adding and sort of affecting their resume, as well as helping them do a little bit of self-reflection work that can go towards their personal statements that they might have to write on supplementary applications. And part of that, in addition to those classes in grade 12, guidance counselors meet regularly with students individually. So we'll meet individually with them in a spare, if they have a spare, before school, after school, lunchtime as well. And that's to really help give that, sort of personalized feedback, because every student is different. They're applying for different programs at a different combination of universities, and we want to be able to give them feedback, particularly on all of the supplementary application materials that are required. When we get to grade 11, I would say that, so grade 9 and 10, it's a bit of course selection and helping inform the students on how their courses can impact. Also in grade 10 and 11, we've increased the number of courses that we offer in the summer. So now students can work ahead in effect and reach ahead to take senior level courses ahead of their senior year or their final year. So this year, for example, we offered grade 10 science and grade 10 history. And that meant that students completing grade 9 could take grade 10 science, let's say, for example, and then in their grade 10 year, instead of having to take 3 sciences in grade 11, if they were, on a sort of pre-med track, they could take one of those grade 11 science courses in their grade 10 year, and then move forward and make changes as they progress. And likewise with a grade 10 history or a grade 11 American history, students can then choose courses to kind of complement their interests, but also to help pave the way to either keep options open or to show that they're gaining a strong standing in the grade 12 courses. But in grade 11 in particular, we meet with them in January to do the course selection, and then we schedule individual meetings with every grade 11 student with the guidance counselor to really look much more closely at how their courses that they're choosing might influence or be connected to what they're interested in at the post-secondary level. And then we share that with parents. I think we share it with parents regardless, grade 9 or 10, we will share with you what the preliminary course selection is. And then we meet with them again in the spring to revise and make sure that the courses they've selected are the ones they want. In terms of other enrichment opportunities, we offer advanced placement courses. And so advanced placement courses are essentially equivalent to first year university level courses. And students will write internationally recognized exams in the spring, May of the year that they take a given course. And so there are many reasons to take AP courses. When students are really looking for a challenge in an area that's of interest to them, that would be a great way to provide enrichment. They cover a greater volume of material because it is that first year university level course, and they also move at a faster pace. But students are in a class with really like-minded individuals. So if you're taking AP Politics, for example, you're in class with everyone that really wants to be there and is engaged in that subject matter. American universities really like to see a selection of some APs. You don't have to take all AP courses, but they're looking to see that students are challenging themselves above the sort of normal university prep level. The UK schools, they don't have a preference for APs, with the exception of Cambridge. Cambridge will actually require applicants to have taken at least 5 AP courses and have scores of 5 on each of their exams. And that's the highest score you can get. So just to give you a sense of the level of rigor that's required by schools like Cambridge or Oxford. But the rest of the UK schools will really base offers based on the Ontario Secondary School Diploma. Canadian universities, many will give credit for an AP course if a student has a score of 4 or 5 on the AP exam. So a student can actually, in first year university, if they had taken AP biology and earned a score of 4 or 5 on the exam, they could accelerate ahead in university and take a second-year biology course, or they could just take a spare and have 1 fewer courses in their first year, or they could repeat it. And, if in the case of, say, looking to apply to professional programs, whether it's, medicine or veterinary school, they could use, a repeated course to really kind of ramp up their GPA. McGill is the only university that will not let students repeat. So if a student does get a 5 on an AP exam, they automatically put you through to the second level of that course if you're going to choose that course. In terms of, whether or not a student should take an AP, I think it's really important to balance that level of rigor, the volume and the pace at which the material is covered, with the ability to just handle the regular academic curriculum. Because marks are still one of the most important factors, we want our students to do as well as they can. And so we do have what we call a pre-AP program, and that allows students to take courses in related subjects and give them a little bit of a prac at what the AP is like. In some courses, they're able to actually write an exam. So in AP English, or the AP English in grade 12, it's the literature exam. In grade 11, it's the language exam. So in some cases, they're able to actually write an AP exam. But regardless of what AP or non-AP courses a student chooses, if they're looking for the AP, we ask that they not only take the AP prep that relates, but that we're really asking them to have an average of 85% in the grade 11 AP prep equivalent. And that's really just to help ensure that they're successful in the AP level course when they get to grade 12. And the last thing I'll just say about university preparation and helping students really start and get going on the application process is that for those who are interested in the US and the UK in particular, because there's additional work, whether it's standardized tests, even medicine and law in the UK will have semester students will need to write in order to be considered for admission. And they also have early deadlines. We really want to have students working early. So in the spring of their grade 11 year, we offer additional sessions for students who are primarily interested in either the US or the UK or both. And that's to help them with the research, to help them learn about the resources that are available to help support them in their applications, to ensure that they're registering for any admissions tests. But more important even than all of that, I would say when students are applying to some of the early programs in the UK and the US, you can see here for Oxford or Cambridge or any medical school program or veterinary or dentistry, the deadline is October 15th. And for many of the early action or early decision schools in the US, it's November 1st. And those dates come up, you know, fast and furious for our students. And they're already busy. They're juggling their courses and they're doing their leadership and their co-curriculars and doing university research and applications. So the more we can get them started in the spring of their grade 11 year, and then also have them working on essay supplements in the summer. We encourage students to send us draft versions of any essays they write when guidance counselors are on call in order to get feedback ahead of time. And the last thing I'll say is just, you know, if English isn't a student's first language, many schools, if a student hasn't been studying with us for 4 years, will require an English language test like TOEFL or IELTS. And so those are the other things that students can do after their grade 11 year, but in the summer. Before I jump into parent support and what you can do as parents, I'll just give you a really quick timeline overview for our current grade 12s. So the way things are working right now, we're really asking all of our current grade 12s to apply to Ontario universities before Christmas. And we're asking them to get all those applications in. Students that are also working on US and UK are doing that at the same time. So depending on their deadlines, they're doing and juggling the UK and the Ontario ones. Because the out-of-province ones, you know, with the exception of, say, UBC and that December 1st major scholarship deadline, because the out-of-province ones are typically later, they're due by February 1st, sometimes the end of February, we will sometimes wait and have students do that later, although I've already have students who have started. Some applications are really straightforward and simple to do. McGill, for all of its competitiveness, students can actually complete that application in 25 minutes. It's kind of unreal in some cases. And then certainly for applications out east as well, those applications can be done fairly easily and quickly. It's the ones that have the supplements, UBC with an embedded set of essay questions and resume, and then the Ontario ones that have additional supplements. We will tend to work on those as a combination of in December and into January. But pretty much all supplements will be finished, I would say, by the end of February, maybe the early March for any art portfolios, which tend to be due by the beginning or middle of March. And then what happens in terms of a timeline, really offers start to come in anywhere from now. We have our first 2 students who have received offers from schools in the UK because they were applying to that early October 15th deadline. And so they've heard from other schools to which they've applied to, anywhere through to March and into May. And some schools, you know, McMaster, for example, they've got some really competitive health science, integrated health and engineering, arts and science. Some of those schools will not give offers until the middle of May. And it's painful for our students because they're waiting and they're seeing other offers come in. But ultimately, for Ontario applications, students have to accept by June 1st. And for out of province, it's a bit earlier, anywhere from May 1st to May 15th. So it is a year-long ongoing process. And then once they accept the offer, we work with them to help them apply for residence applications. And in many cases, we are helping them register for their first year of courses at university, helping them build timetables and connecting them with university advisors. So it really is an ongoing process. But one with lots of highs, I would say, more than lows. And really we seek to give students a real range of opportunities to have at the end of their grade 12 year, so that they're in the driver's seat choosing where they want to be, as opposed to having, you know, one offer with that choice made for them. So how can you continue to help? I would say really continue to do what you're already doing, which is being engaged in the process, attending sessions like this, asking questions. That's really helpful, just to be in the know and be aware. I think also encouraging, you know, realistic goals. So definitely setting the sights on those reach schools, but also being realistic about, you know, you may think you want to be out in BC, apply out west, absolutely. But if you know your child and you think, you know what, I think they actually might be better being, you know, a little bit closer to home within 2 to 4 hours of a weekend visit, encouraging them to do that as well. We also really encourage students to keep their options open. So often I'll have students who are deciding amongst, 2 or 3 different program areas. So let's say, for example, students who are interested in business and they're also interested in engineering in the fall of their grade 12 year, often we'll get them with, parental consent to apply to both and then give themselves the remainder of the year to make some decisions, to finish, doing some of the coursework that relates. Do they really love physics or do they really love international business? Where are their strengths? Where are their passions? Where are they interested? And then it just gives them another 6 or 7 months to be able to make that decision. Be in touch with your child's guidance counselor, your teen's guidance counselor. For those of you that currently have a child in grade 12, you hopefully already know who that guidance counselor is. For those of you that have a child in grade 9 through 11, it really is, it's done by Alpha, but it's not like a perfect Alpha system. So actually Laura Elliott is sort of the surname A to CDE in kind of grade 9, 10, and 11. Jen Brown is, I would say, CDE, surnames, starting with CD or E to JK or L. I tend to work with students that have surnames that begin JKL to ST, and then Tom Milburn picks up sort of the end of the Alpha. But if you're not sure, please feel free to reach out to me. You can also ask your son or daughter's advisor because they have access to the list that matches the student with their guidance counselor. And it'll be the same guidance counselor from grade 9 to 11. And then, like I said, ideally the same when you get to grade 12, but not always. The only other thing I'll say, and again, in this time of a pandemic when we're not able to visit schools as much as we would like, as much as possible, if you're able to explore schools with your children, whether it's visiting in person, like I said, some schools are offering, they're open for you to drive around the campus or walk around the campus. Others have tours. And then really helping to ensure that if they are looking to those programs that require additional assessments, making sure they're set up for that. The other thing would just really be helping them to find opportunities to not just explore their interests further, whether it's with work or, volunteering. Any kind of internship opportunity can really be a help. Any types of educational programs can also be a help. And the only other thing I would say is just, keep in the loop with the university guidance for parents group. There's lots of information there that is shared and updated on a weekly basis. And even just getting access to some of the university info sessions can provide a lot of insight and information. With that, I think we have a few minutes for questions. I feel like I've talked everyone's ears off.
That's great. There are some questions. I might save some of the more specific ones to follow up with some of you through email on, but I want to take a couple, get Kirsten to answer a couple of them. In respect of a student isn't quite sure what they might want to study after they go to when they go to university, what support can we offer in terms of if they're not sure yet?
Yeah, so beyond, meeting with their guidance counselor for sure to talk through options, that's one thing that students can do. And definitely, in the careers course and in our guidance class, there are some online assessments that offer through the program My Blueprint, but we also offer the Strong Interest Inventory, which is a well-known vocational assessment that we will meet with the student and have them do. Right now, I'm the only one that does it, but we're hoping that Jen Brown will also be able to do that soon. But that's another tool. There's a slight cost for that, but it gives them a 12-page report. I email the parents out with a summary, meet with the students before and after, and really try and connect the results of that with post-secondary programs to consider. I say to students, it's not here's what you absolutely should do. It's just another tool in the toolbox to help, in some cases, reassure students that they're on the right track, or to provide insight into new opportunities and programs that they might not have thought of. So we do offer that, and you can speak to, you can reach out to me if you are interested in having that done with your son or daughter.
Great. Okay, in terms of a question about AP courses, how many AP courses does Lakefield offer, and do AP marks play a specific role in admissions and applications?
We offer 11 AP courses and almost the equivalent for the AP prep. We also, if a student comes to us and says, I want to write the AP Spanish exam. We don't have an AP Spanish course, but we will be able to order the AP exam for that subject area. And so sometimes, before we even offered AP Physics, we had students that were expressing interest in that, and they created a little study group and prepared for that on their own. And that can show great initiative in applications as well. The marks. So for a Canadian application, really, the only reason why they'll want to see an AP mark is if they want to give credit for that course. And so students would submit their marks. I mean, they don't get the marks until July of the year that they write the exam. So it's not really a factor in the admissions process for Canadian or even American schools. American schools take it into consideration because they're looking at it in terms of academic rigor. Now, the UK is a different story altogether. If a student is taking an AP course, the schools may come back and say, you know, we want an 85 average overall in your 6th grade 12 courses, including prerequisites, and we want a score of 5 on your AP chemistry exam. So it really fluctuates from school to school in the UK in that regard, but that's the only time that I've seen schools actually build it into the conditions. No other schools outside of the UK do that.
Great. So I want to respect that it's 2 o'clock and we can wrap up the call.
Okay. Thank you so much for giving up an hour in your day to be here with us. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions whatsoever. We're really happy to help. We love supporting your children. We learn things every day from them, and really happy to answer any questions that you might have.